Your friend claims that he averages 94% on his exams. You want to test his claim. So first we're going to identify the null hypothesis, which we represent with the symbol H sub 0. We're going to identify the alternative hypothesis, which we represent with the symbol H sub A. So your friend claims that he averages 94% on the exam. First off, we're talking about an average. So that means we're going to use the symbol mu here. So we're not talking about a population proportion, we're talking about a population mean. Okay? And your friend claims that he averages 94% on his exams. Notice he's not saying he claims that he averages more than 94% or at least 94% on the exam. He's claiming that he averages exactly 94% on his exams. So exactly 94% would mean that the claim is that the population mean is equal to 0.94. Okay? And in this case, we just want to test his claim. We are given no additional information. So the other hypothesis is just the same thing, but with the opposite symbol. And the opposite of equals is not equals. So these are going to be our hypotheses. And since this one has an equals in the middle, it has an equals in the expression, this is our null hypothesis. And since this one has a not equals, which means it doesn't have an equals in the expression, this is our alternative hypothesis. So our null hypothesis is that the population mean, that the average of all his exams is 94% or 0.94. And the alternative hypothesis is just the opposite, so that the population mean is not equal to 0.94. Okay? All right, next part of the problem. A hypothesis test is conducted at the 4% significance level. So we're conducting a hypothesis test at the 4% significance level. That significance level, that's our alpha. So 4%, that's 0.04. That's our alpha. That is the threshold with which we are comfortable in rejecting the null hypothesis. If the probability of the sample we get is lower than that alpha, assuming the null hypothesis were true, then we think that's so unlikely that we think the null hypothesis is probably not true and we would reject it. Okay. We are also told that after this hypothesis test is conducted, the p-value is 0.018. So 0.018 is the p-value. So this is the probability that our sample, that we get our sample at least as extreme as the one we actually got, assuming the null hypothesis is true. In this case, our p-value is smaller than our alpha. It's less than alpha. Remember, alpha is our threshold. If we're smaller than that alpha, then our outcome is unlikely enough that we are comfortable in rejecting the null hypothesis. And so in this case, we are going to reject. We reject the null hypothesis. Okay? So in which one of these situations do we conclude that we reject the null hypothesis? So the first one is you cannot conclude that your friend doesn't average a 94% on his exams. So your friend doesn't average a 94% on his exams. Notice that's the alternative hypothesis. Okay, so the average is not 94%, right? So the first option is that you cannot conclude that. So that means that if you cannot conclude your alternative, then you're sticking with your null hypothesis. You're not rejecting your null hypothesis. That's not what we're doing here, right? We've decided that we can reject our null hypothesis. So it better be this option that's our answer. You conclude that your friend doesn't average 94% on his exam. So we're concluding that the null hypothesis is correct, which means we are rejecting we're concluding the alternative hypothesis is correct, which means we are rejecting the null hypothesis. Okay? So let's submit, and we have it.